Hi everybody! Today's video is going to be in the serious things playlist because it is about this booger called shame. You know, I've done a lot of personal work over the last couple of years, and I feel kind of ashamed to admit that it never dawned on me that really at the base of all the things that I have been working on and trying to heal, there was shame. I wasn't born with it. You weren't born with it. It's not part of our essence. It's not really part of who we are, but it becomes something that's so much a part of us we don't even recognize it. Because, for whatever reason, someone in our life, probably several someones since we tend to repeat patterns, decided to try to make us feel ashamed. So I want to start out by making it very clear, I'm no therapist. I don't have any professional training. The only thing I am an expert at is experiencing shame. It's not really what I would want to be an expert at, but I can see now how really it's always shame we come back to when we are triggered, when we're reacting. It brings us back to that dark spot in our hearts where we think it's got to be something wrong with us. It's got to be some flaw, some defect. It's shame that's been instilled by other people in us. And I'm not saying it's easy, but it seems to me that once we recognize it, we can do something to address it. So at the end, I'm going to share, one of my odd little things that I came up with for myself. It may or may not resonate with you. But after this intro, and before that, I'm going to share some excerpts from a few articles about shame. Because if you clicked on this, there must have been something that made you curious. There may be something of value here to you. I tend to think that we keep things hidden in the dark that are shame-based because we don't want to deal with them or because we're not aware of them, and that when we decide to take them out of the closet and hold them up to the light, we're taking away some of the power and giving it back to ourselves. So that's really what I'm trying to do in this video, is help people see that they can take their power back from shame just by acknowledging that it has been influencing them. We'll see how this goes. I almost started out with a character and then thought, no, that's not going to fit. Because that is almost like saying I'm ashamed of who I am. And you know what? I'm tired of carrying shame around. Maybe you are too. So let's see where this goes, okay? There are 4 different kinds of shame. The first is unrequited love, showing love and being rejected. Now you might think that this is only when you get older and you start having love interests, but it actually can begin at a very young age with a parent who is emotionally unavailable. You're not loved in the same way that you are loving them. The second one is unwanted exposure. Basically, it's being shamed publicly. So I suppose an example would be being outed as to your sexual preference when you have been trying to keep your life private. The third is disappointed expectation. So this is like setting out to do something, maybe sharing it with your friends that you fully intend to succeed, and then it doesn't turn out so well, so you feel ashamed that you didn't reach your goal. And the fourth one is being excluded, left out of something. So it could be that your best friend is having a party and you keep waiting for the invitation only to realize that there's no plan to invite you at all. And then, breaking shame down a little further, there are the categories that you can feel ashamed about or that people may target to make you feel ashamed. The very first one is body shaming, appearance and body image. I don't think I have to give an example of that. Almost everybody has been body shamed at one time or another. The next is money and work. So Alice down the road might be bragging about her husband pulling in 6 figures, and it makes you feel ashamed that you're busting your ass making minimum wage. And then the next category has 3 elements in it, but they all kind of tie in together. So motherhood, fatherhood, how you parent. People may criticize you for not being more strict, or may criticize you for being too lenient. May just tell you you're a bad mother or a father. And then there is family separate from motherhood and fatherhood, which I suppose could be like a parent that has a preference of a sibling over you and makes it clear to you all the time that you just don't cut it. There can be shame over mental and physical health. People with disabilities often are made to feel inferior, and of course, people with mental illnesses are the butt of jokes and poor treatment often. Addiction is another one. If you've never had an addiction, I am so happy for you. But for any of us that have become addicted to something, it is really embarrassing to have to admit that we can't just decide that we don't need this thing anymore, and it's done. Sex is another category where people are shamed. Another category is aging. Being made to feel like you're less than because you can't do what you used to be able to do. Maybe feeling ashamed yourself because you see more and more wrinkles every day and you are feeling limited by your age. Another category is religion. The next one is surviving trauma. Now you know there should be no shame about being victimized. But this is probably the biggest category here, at least in my opinion, having been abused. Often our abusers are the ones that originally put that shame into us when we're young. And rape victims have been treated as if they must have provoked it. It's a sad thing that anyone could try to put shame on a person after they've already suffered the trauma, but it is life, unfortunately. And then the last one is being stereotyped or labeled. So this could be like, oh, all gay people are blah, 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 blah. All right, so that's it for the categories. Maybe my narrations were a little lame. I'll shame myself on that one. Now, we talked about being shamed about surviving trauma, and one of the excerpts is about abuse. If you were a victim of childhood abuse or neglect, you know about shame. You have likely been plagued by it all your life without identifying it as shame. You may feel shame because you blame yourself for the abuse itself, or because you felt such humiliation at having been abused. While those who were sexually abused tend to suffer from the most shame, those who suffered from physical, verbal, or emotional abuse blame themselves as well. In a case of child sexual abuse, no matter how many times you've heard the words, "It's not your fault," the chances are high that you still blame yourself in some way. Possibly for being submissive, for not telling someone and having the abuse continue. It may have been put upon you that you enticed the abuser with your behavior or the way you dressed. And in some cases, people feel shame because the sexual abuse causes them to feel some type of physical pleasure. In the case of physical, verbal, and emotional abuse, you may blame yourself for not listening and thus making a parent or a caretaker so angry that he or she yelled at you or hit you. Children tend to blame the neglect and abuse they experience on themselves. They come up with justification for why they deserved the treatment. And as an adult, you may have continued this kind of rationalization, putting up with poor treatment by others because you believe you brought it on yourself. Conversely, when good things happen to you, you may actually become uncomfortable because you feel so unworthy. Former victims of child abuse are typically changed by the experience, not only because they were traumatized, but because they feel a loss of innocence and dignity, and they carry forward a heavy burden of shame. Emotional, physical, and sexual child abuse can so overwhelm a victim with shame that it actually comes to define the person, keeping them from their full potential. It can cause a victim both to remain fixed at the age they were at the time of the victimization and to repeat the abuse over and over in their lifetime by attracting people that will do the same to them. Now, the last thing I want to share is from an article by Beverly Engel, who is an LMFT. It is called How I Healed Myself of Shame. I can't remember a time when I didn't feel shame, but I do have evidence that there was once a time when I was shame-free. I have a photograph of me as a little baby, smiling with a twinkle in my eye. I look radiant and filled with joy. I have another photo of me at 4, in which I am frowning, and I look defiant and lost. The twinkle in my eye has been replaced with a dark, empty look. What had occurred that had taken away the joyous smile on my face and replaced it with darkness, emptiness, and hatred? The answer? Shame. Shame replaced my innocence, my joy, my exuberance for life. Shame caused me to build a wall of protection and defiance. Here is how I worked to heal myself and combat my feelings of shame, and how you can also. Stop blaming yourself for the abuse. There is absolutely nothing a child can do that warrants a parent emotionally or physically abusing them, and there is absolutely nothing a child can do to cause someone to sexually abuse them. You did not cause your abuser to mistreat you. Give your shame back to your abusers. Imagine going inside your body to look for shame. Some see shame as a cloud of blackness. others as an ache in their stomach or a pain in their heart. Wherever you sense shame, imagine taking it and throwing it back at your abuser. Gain an understanding as to why you might have acted out and behaved as you did later in your life. Instead of viewing yourself as bad, begin to view your negative behaviors as attempts to cope with the abuse. The following are some of the most common coping mechanisms in former victims of childhood abuse. Eating disorders like binging, compulsive overeating, and emotional eating. Self-injury, cutting, burning, head banging, or any other form of self-harm. Difficulties with sexual adjustment, sexualizing relationships, becoming hypersexual, or avoiding sexual contact. You also might have alternated between those two extremes. Show self-compassion. Compassion is the antidote to shame. It acts to neutralize the poison of shame, to remove the toxins created by shame. The goal is to treat yourself in a loving, kind, and supportive way. Think of a phrase to soothe and encourage yourself. Look at yourself in the mirror, make eye contact, and say this phrase with certainty. Now, I have to insert in here that if you're anything like me, you probably don't value yourself enough to put the effort into this. But if you can force yourself to show yourself the compassion, eventually you're going to start seeing your self-worth also. That's why I was saying this shame is like the underpinning of so much of what hinders us in life. The things that those of us who are doing personal work are trying to change. So take the time for yourself, even if you don't think you're worth it, please. And the last one is provide yourself with forgiveness. Self-forgiveness is different from letting yourself off the hook or making excuses for negative behavior. The more shame you heal, the more clearly you'll be able to see yourself. Instead of hardening your heart and pushing people away, you'll become more receptive to others. It's important to work toward forgiving yourself for the abuse itself, the ways you hurt others because of your own abusive experiences, and the ways you have harmed yourself. The conclusion paragraph in this article now. Don't let shame take over your life. It took me many years to rid myself of the shame that followed me nearly all my life. The important thing is that you just begin to heal your shame so it doesn't dictate your life. And that is it for the excerpts that I wanted to share. I'll be back on video in just a second. I'm back. Now here is what you may perceive to be the goofy part. Remember, this is just my thing. This is just how I deal with things when they come up. It's a bit goofy because I'm goofy. So there was a movie in the 70s called Network, and it was about TV stations. There was an anchor that kind of went off on a diatribe about the depression and how people were suffering and life was just a dirty deal. He started on it, he got more and more incensed, and suddenly he was encouraging people to follow his lead. He was telling people to go to the window, fling it open, lean out, and say, I am mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore. If I remember, I will include have to do is Google. Well, you could Google it or just search on YouTube. I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. So when I realized that this shame is really what has been at the root of all the issues I've been working on, and so really what I've accomplished is not as much as I had thought, because the shame still existed and can be triggered, take over at any time. I decided that rather than the depression and the suffering people are going through because of that, which is what the movie talked about, I was going to use that for shame. I literally went into the bathroom and looked in the mirror and said, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. And of course what I meant is, I'm not going to keep this shame. It's not mine to carry around anymore. Now I'm not saying that doing something as small as that can take away decades of shame, but it is taking power back from the shame. It's taking power back from the people that shamed you, that colored your entire life in this way where you don't feel like you're good enough, where you feel like there's something wrong. This is all about shame. So watch the video clip if you are intrigued by this, and see the response that this man got. You know, of course, the people at the station were nervous that he was doing this awful thing, and then it turned out it was spreading all around, and people all around were sticking their heads out of their windows and screaming their outrage. Well, you know, we should be outraged. So many of us can be passive after we've been abused, but we should be outraged. We didn't deserve the shaming. We don't deserve to be carrying it around still. So this may be something you can do to take your power back from the shame, from the people that put that upon you. If you want to open a window and stick your head out and scream it, go ahead. If you want to scream it in the mirror, go ahead. Put some gusto behind it. If you want to write it in the comments to reinforce it, please do. I am mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore. In other words, shame, and pardon my French, can go fuck itself. We don't need to continue our lives with shame hanging over our heads, or stuck in our hearts, or wherever it is in us that is keeping us small, keeping us from accomplishing what we can in career, in relationships, just feeling good about ourselves. We don't need the shame anymore, and it's okay to be angry about it. Take your power back in whatever way you feel drawn to, but take your power back, because you are more powerful than shame any day. You just have to recognize that. I hope there was something of value in this video. I don't want to be an expert in shame anymore, and I doubt you do either. Just holding it out to the light and recognizing that you don't need to hold on to this thing that's been pulling you down is a powerful first step. You deserve to be free of shame. I deserve to be free of shame. Let's do it. Okay, till next time.